So he makes all the announcements. So today you can take patient care session 9. And then the next session you're having his class is most likely chapter 3, 6, 10, so he's probably going to do that today.
Oh wait, are you able to get on and see if the screen mirroring's right? Okay, just like so that you can read the stuff on the board. Sure, I'll come over there and look it up. I'm just kidding. No, it should be on here. It should be on here. Yep, mute participants upon entry. I'll uncheck. There's literally a mute all button right here. Okay, cool. That helps.
So if y'all,
Somebody at US maybe.
She said it was you.
Okay. All right. No. Shanna?
Yeah.
Shanna Bell? You know, it was an interesting scenario. That was at UF.
Oh,
It wasn't here. We had a smaller group. And that chair that she sat in. No. Had a little run with pregnancies. Over the years. Yeah, I don't know what it was. But yeah.
Is it what's the pregnant chair?
I had a chair that if one of the ladies sat in it, because of some history, she might have to get pregnant.
Yeah, I seen one of the students
Yeah.
from 20 years ago.
But she, you know,
And she said that she was pregnant in class, that she was like one of the first people ever pregnant there because y'all had to figure out how
Yeah.
to handle it.
where was this? You saw her?
At SIG, the CPR person you said.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Oh,
She goes to get recertified every 2 years by him.
Sig McGarity.
Yeah.
How was he?
Good.
Was he good?
Mhm.
Reasonable?
Mhm.
Yeah. He's a UF guy too.
Here's my spirit animal.
After I was on TV and I went to look, I was like,
Tequila.
Anybody gonna take that test today?
I like.
Inverse square law and stuff. Were you?
I think the other Nicole was saying, we'll just like come by on parking lot. Mighty.
I mean, they're you only done.
Oh, you are? Okay, so I'll be meeting you too. That's all.
is that one pretty close enough? Or like,
I'm
Memorial Weekend?
I can like ride my bike. I know. I do ride my bike out there. All these little trails on
Oh, that's nice. I'm gonna do that at like 5 every morning. Oh, yeah. To get the wind.
It's horrible. So it's like if I could think of like.
We can get there, I'm getting there, no time, I didn't have to do
Oh, it's a fun time.
Okay, can I steal this pen?
Okay, so am I muted or unmuted?
you're unmuted right now.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 7. Today we're going to do chapter 11 in the patient care book. It's titled Patient Interactions. And starting with today's material, this will be a part of exam 3. You won't be tested on this till into November. Let's do a voice check. Type in if you can hear me. Very good. All right, so we're going to do patient care first. And then we're going to do some housekeeping. And what do you think that might involve here?
Clinical. Yeah, we're going to wrap up getting you prepared for clinical. Clinical is a go because I do have your radiation monitoring badges. Not to worry, you won't have to come up here and get them. I have some classmates here today. They will be packing an envelope to bring with them the first day with all of your necessary materials. Braylon wants to know, are we skipping chapter 10? Yes, we're skipping that. So not to worry, there'll be an envelope with one of your classmates with your badge in it and your necessary documents that you'll need. So it seems like I'm going into housekeeping now, but I'm going to stop. We'll come back to it. So let's begin chapter 11, patient interactions. Now, here's my opening statement on this. And the key to patient interactions is observe your patient. That's the best thing you can do. And with experience, you'll be able to look for special things, but you're going to be surprised at the people who come for a radiograph, have no idea why they're there. Okay, because you're going to take a history and to get some information for the radiologist, and you're going to get, I don't know, my doctor just sent me over here. Okay, so that's what you're going to. So you've got to learn how to probe with your patients. Good morning. You can sit. So another thing that patients perceive is competency. Now, turning the page, there it is for those of you that took Psych 101. I'm looking at what? Anyone here? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you're working with your patients, their needs kind of come in at the bottom of that. I'm on page 132, maybe 129 in a different edition. It's the triangle. So those are some of the patient needs. They're counting on you for that. Another thing I want to talk about early in this chapter is patient dignity, especially if they're a patient for fluoral, which means they're there for a GI study. Their history might be very sensitive. You're going to see eventually something called a colostomy bag, okay, which makes patients very sensitive. You're just going to be sensitive to those needs. You know, I'll kind of jump ahead to a study. When you guys get into studying, and this will be next semester for positioning, you're going to study cervical spine positioning. And the upper cervical spine is very difficult to image because of what? The face and the jaw are in the way. But you can make it easy on yourself. When you're x-raying this part of the upper cervical spine, just politely ask your patient, by any chance, do you have dentures? And if they say, oh yes, it'll be a lot easier for you to do that radiograph if you can have them remove their dentures. Now, some people are really sensitive to this. My mother had them. She didn't want anybody to see her with them out. But you come back to your patient now and you'll hand them a device, an emesis basin maybe, and say, do you mind putting your dentures here? And when they do it, go do something else. Don't watch them, okay? And you'll come back, they'll have the dentures in there, and you'll be home free positioning, okay? So respect your patient's dignity. You know, another one's going to be asking, any chance you might be pregnant? Okay, and you're gonna find in your hospitals, you may have to ask all ages. And when you get some of these mature women, you're gonna hear the funniest things. Yes?
How do you ask like a kid without being like the mom being like, what the hell are you asking?
I don't know.
So
What's,
like you're in the room and you have to ask the question, and the mom is there. And she's like 12, and like, it's probably easier for girls to do it, but like.
oh, that, yeah.
For them that young, my daughter's had actually like every 6 months.
We have
so they
questions
just
here.
ask if, when, has she started, you just say yes or no. They don't ask if she's pregnant, they just ask if they started.
So you ask the parent or you ask the child?
Yeah, legally, like.
You look at the parent.
I would ask the parent that.
What if they have?
Yeah, and another thing, these are really good questions. Watch how they do it. Because you got to understand, there's somebody in this radiology department you're going to who's been down this road. They'll show you. Yeah.
I can just imagine a mom being like, why would you ask my 12-year-old daughter?
Oh, yeah, that would come back to you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, let's, before we get into the nitty gritty, I mean, everybody can certainly understand the difference between an inpatient and an outpatient. Just a few things. Your inpatients, these are the people who come in a wheelchair or a stretcher. Okay, they're going to watch and listen for everything. The outpatient, and I'll ask the group here, type in if you like, what do you think is important to the outpatient? Anybody want to type in? Yes. Get going. Let's get this done. You know, I got to be somewhere. Okay. So you need to respect their time. And they will get antsy. And and as long as we're on this, when you're in clinical and they send you to the waiting room to get the outpatient and bring them to the room, you have to use their whole name. You've got to use their whole name. You need to verify who they are, because some people who've sat there for a while, guess what they'll do? No. Well, they might do that. They'll answer to anything. Because why? I'm next. You know how it is when you wait. I was here before her. I was here before her. Why is she? Okay, so you've got to verify your patient. Yeah. We never want to do a radiograph, A, on the wrong patient, B, on the wrong extremity. Sometimes there's a question about why does one patient go before the other? It's the nature of the study and the availability of the room. Okay? If they're waiting for a GI study, they may wait a while. But you'll see in some departments, all the GI patients are in a certain area, away from the general radiography group. Good question. All right. Another note that I have here, I'm telling you today, families are more involved than ever. Families are more involved than ever. They ask a lot of questions. You may see some scenarios where a family member will go into the radiographic room. You have to be sensitive to them, especially with kids. They'll come in the room. There'll be times when you need the mother or father to hold the child still. Families are a big part of a patient's medical operation. Let me ask, during orientation, did I talk about those of you that might know a foreign language? Did I talk about that? Okay, you know, if you're bilingual and you get in your department, you can be a real service to the institution if you let it be known that I'm fluent in French or Italian, and you can get put on a registry where they will come and get you to interpret sometimes. You have a real value for that. So that's your call if you want to let that be known. And if, you know, and if we get a lot of Spanish speaking and you know Spanish, you'll be the go-to person. You'll be the go-to person. All right, moving along here. I know we talked about dignity, inpatient, outpatient. Now I'm going to talk about something called para-language. P-A-R-A, para-language. And for the group here, or type it in, what's your concept of a para-language? No, that's nonverbal. We're not doing nonverbal. Okay. I like that. Mia says attitude. There it is. Like the vibe you give off. It's really how you say things and your inflection. It's your what? What's that 4-letter word? What's that 4-letter word? No, body language is coming. There it is. Thank you, Catherine. It's tone. All right, for those of you that have teenagers, I'm sure you've used this tone piece, right? Yeah, it's how you say it. All right, so body language. Be sensitive to body language, of your own body language and the patient's. Now, here's the one I always talk about. And here, I'll try to tweak this. And the group here, they're proud of me, Ethan. All right. What does this mean? We're doing nonverbal now, body language. What does this mean? Come on, type in. What does this mean when somebody does this? Defensive? You're closed off? No. I just might be cold. Okay, but this does have a connotation, doesn't it? You know, and if you really want to shut somebody off, you turn your back and you do this. That is really what? A shutdown. I don't advise that for the hospital with your communication with the patient or the staff. You can do this to your friends and maybe significant other or whoever, okay? You can do that. Okay, now another thing too, you've got to be careful, and I think people are doing less and less of this these days, and that is touching people. You know, over time, has touching become politically incorrect? I mean, even a little tap on the shoulder, hey, you did a good job. Can you do that? Okay, be careful with that. Be careful, of course, now to position your patient. To position your patient, you're going to have to touch them. But then again, you'll have the seniors that will do what? They'll reach out to you. They may take your hand. Oh, thank you. You've been so kind. You've been so gentle. You know, others have been but you really went the extra mile. So you could run into that. Touching today, people don't like to be touched. All righty, personal appearance. Personal appearance will probably be discussed with you guys Monday when you get to clinical in terms of what you can do and what you cannot do in terms of hair, up or down, loopy earrings. Okay, what do you think a loopy earring is? It's a hazard because somebody's gonna do what? They're gonna, a baby, somebody might have some pain and reach, they catch your earring. So that should all be covered in your clinical area. Be sensitive to patients being confused. You'll be briefed, I'm sure, when you get to the hospital, and this is really a good thing. There's something called a patient is falls sensitive. Okay, they will get an assessment and get an orange bracelet in many cases, which means what? They're a fall hazard and you may have to stay with them, hold them. There could even be a restriction. You don't stand them up. Okay, you don't stand them up. All right, let's talk about types of patients. It's usually something, there's a question here on campus about covering up tattoos. It could be some type of a high device on your neck or a sleeve from a sweater or an undergarment. This will all be covered. You're going to learn the culture of your department. Okay? I would go with white. Yeah, I would go with white for an undergarment for the first day. Okay. We're looking at understanding the various types of patients, seriously ill or traumatized patients. They're going to have a lot of pain. They may be incoherent. On medication. They may be in shock. And the key for the seriously ill and trauma is speed. And speed. And as a student, as a first year student, if this is the scenario, and I know I did this when I was on the floor, somebody just needs to say to the student, look, we got to move on this. Okay? Maybe you just stand back and watch, or I'm going to give you some menial things to do. That's the best thing now. Versus someone who's not as critical, you're not as busy. I would just stand back and let the patient work or the student work. And if I needed to tweak it, I would tweak it. So be sensitive to that. If it's seriously ill and it's a trauma, you'll get the feel for what's going on here. We need to move fast. And in that case, here's something you can do the first day. I think everybody knows what a crash cart is. Anybody not? You know what a crash cart is? Okay. You know what a crash cart is? All right. Let me talk about a crash cart. It's a cart. It's on wheels, and it has a lot of drawers and cabinets, and it has emergency equipment and emergency medicine for somebody who gets into trouble with a life-threatening situation. You're not expected to do anything with it but one thing. You don't have to open it, do anything with it, but you need to know where it is. And if somebody says to you, Heather, get the crash cart, you need to go get it. Okay, that's your role. Okay, because I know I had a student once at one of the hospitals that started to go through it. Things in there are sterile, you know, they can only be used once. No, all your role is know where it is, and if they need it, fetch it. All right, so for the seriously ill, visually impaired, give them clear instructions. Now, you may have to touch these patients, maybe by the elbow, just to kind of what? Guide them along. You may have a scenario where someone has a speech or hearing impairment. It's okay to do communication, writing. People that have a mental issue, be very reassuring. Try to engage them into some type of a dialogue so that you have their attention. And periodically, you may run into somebody that has a substance abuse issue. They may not be aware. Work as efficiently as you can. And I'll talk about this piece now, and that is you'll probably see some patients that are restrained. Okay, they're in a chair or on a cart and they're restrained. And the way that works is we just don't randomly put people in restraints. That has to be evaluated by a physician or a nurse practitioner and prescribed, just like medicine. It just doesn't happen. To restrain somebody, it has to be professionally evaluated and done.
What about when you have a prisoner, the top screen prisoners in the hospital, and that happens? Is there like specific protocol for the hospital that you just follow?
There's a question here on campus. What about for those of you that may have to do radiographs of a prisoner? Now, as a rule, they're escorted. Okay, they're escorted. They have handcuffs and what do you call them, Ethan? The leg thing? Leg cuffs. Thanks. I'm glad you're here. Ankle brace. Okay. Yeah, they'll have somebody with them. And you know, if you give them an instruction and they don't, just look at the guard and say, all right, this is what I need him, he or she to do.
So like if they have to tip off.
Yeah, you might have to, but you know, again, then it gets into their world and what they can do. But here's the thing, and it's right here. Your badge, okay? You're going to see people with their badge kind of tweaked. They'll take a piece of tape and put it over their last name. Why do you think they do that? Oh yeah, because patients, yeah, they'll say, Gene Smith, I'm going to remember you. And that'll freak, you know what I mean? Then they got your, you know, just, you can, put a piece of tape over your last name or do this. Flip it over. Pardon me? Possibly, yes. Not all hospitals. But, you know, I don't know of any scenarios where a prisoner has hurt a radiographer. Yeah. They're part of the population that need health care. And, you know, you got to look beyond that. There are nursing staff and other healthcare professionals that have to work with them too. The uptick for us is in and out. It's minimal. Some prisons will have a department, yeah. And be sensitive to the fact that when you go to do portables, your patient could be comatose. What sense do they still have? Hearing, be sensitive to that. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to look at patients in terms of how they respond and how we respond by age. Pediatrics. Do not leave kids alone. Speak in a very calm voice. Ask the child if they understand and can they demonstrate for you. Then you'll get those kids that they'll do whatever you tell them. They've done it before. They'll do it. They're really good. But here's one thing. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Pardon me? What? Okay. All right. So that's kids. Now we'll talk about kids that are from birth to 1. Those kids like to be held. Your real challenge will be taking baby from mom. That's going to be a real challenge. And you know, when people come into healthcare like you guys have done, this is some of why you get a drug screen and a background check. Because mom's given baby to a healthcare professional and we want to make sure it's the right individual. Now, when I started this profession, it wasn't even a consideration. All you guys have gone through, all I had to do was one thing, get a physical. That's been in place for years. No drug screen, no background check, nothing like that. Yeah. This is why. So you're going to give baby to mom. Parents can be helpful. Oh, you try to calm them down. Okay, yeah.
Can you ask the parent or mom to put baby in the biggest sack?
Absolutely, you can ask mom to, you can say this, Mom, I'm gonna need you. Come with me, bring the baby. We need her or him to sit in this device, okay?
What age, with the baby, wouldn't the parent always need to be present with the radiographer?
I would do that. No, you see more parents on the 3 to 11 shift, okay? But that's not golden, yeah. Let them come in, okay? Let them come in. And here's the thing, with kids, we have restraining devices, so they hold still. They don't look very pleasant. You got to prepare mom and dad. Now, this isn't going to look good, but I assure you they're not in any pain, okay? Because you got to you got to do that. And then, you know, I'll share my story with you now. Here's one thing you don't do with a kid. You don't do this to a kid. What do you think I'm going to say? Group here or type in the chat box? No, you better not. You don't yell at anybody else's kid but your own. What don't you do? You don't lie. You don't tell the kid, this isn't going to hurt. And if it does, it's over for you. You've got to tell them. You have got to be honest with them. This true story. I had a case one night and the parent was helping and dad pulls me aside and says, look, I think I wore a white uniform at the time. Dad said to me, hey, my daughter had a really bad experience with a guy dressed in white. Would you mind if one of the girls did it? I'll take care of that. So I went and got one of the girls and took over. So you need to honor the request when that happens. Yeah, because if you lie to them, they're not going to trust anybody else dressed like you. And if it's going to hurt, guess what you got to do with a kid? It's going to hurt, yeah. With kids, you can use simple words. All right, moving along now I'm looking at the ages of 3 to 5. Now, these kids kind of perceive things, and you may run into a child that says, I'm sick because I was bad. You ever think about that? Maybe not. These
Setting us up for potential child services.
could be. It could, that could escalate, Ethan. Kids have a short attention span, and you need to get them to trust you. 5 to 10-year-olds have a better understanding. They may or may not be fearful.
What was the point of 3 to 5 years old? Being trust?
3 to 5 years old, they're going to watch you. They have a short attention span. Get their trust. A lot of times with these kids, if you can make them feel important, like they're a part of something, okay, in other words, just say, hey, would you mind holding this for me? Now they're a part of the team. Come on, let's go. Yeah. You can do that. Now we're moving along. I'm in the 10 to 25-year-old. This is when, especially young males are aware of their body. Modesty is very important to them. And I'm sure you've all experienced this. At that age range, 10 to 25, their friends, their peer group are what? All that matters. Right? That's what matters. They want to be grown up. 25 to 45-year-old young adults. Their thing is, I'm busy, I got a lot going on. Now, I'll share a few stories. And girls, you're going to have to watch for this. There's something out there called, and I'm sure you all know what a pretty boy is. You all know what a pretty boy is. In other words, you touch them and they jump. Okay? A little pain, they're a bunch of big babies. All right, and I'll share this story. This is a true story. That happened, it was a young guy, and he was deathly afraid of radiation. And he was afraid of it. And he was afraid because of a few x-rays, he was going to lose his hair. All right, he was going to lose his hair. And my friend, who, this was a graveyard shift. And on graveyard shifts, dress code gets a little off the road. And the radiographer had a ball cap on. And he was going to try to humor this young adult. And before he did the radiograph, he took his hat off, and he was bald. He took his hat off and said, you got nothing to worry about. I just started doing this a couple weeks ago. So a little humor there where they tried to calm the young adult. If you feel they're too aggressive, step back, get someone. But there's a question here about some male patients, and I have it in my notes. I'm going to mention it now. Sometimes with patients, you just got to get firm. Okay, you know that from with your kids. You got to say, now look, if you don't do this, we're going to be here forever. Just lay it out. Don't get personal. Okay. Watch your paralanguage, just kind of matter-of-factly put it on the table. All right, moving along now for middle-aged, 45 to 65. These folks you can find, they may be comfortable with life. They've reached their wealth goals. And now they start to have what? Some health issues. And they're very anxious. And we'll do the 65 and up group. And we could sit here all day and have this discussion. What is old? Right? What is old? Who is considered old? Every year what, Ethan?
Every year I get older, older gets older. Like when I was 15, I thought a 30-year-old was decent.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, well, look at from where I sit. Look at from where I sit. Every year we start a new group, you know. And are the students getting younger? Or am I just getting older? That's what it is. I'm getting older. They're the same. What is old? And you've heard the old thing, what? 70 is the new 60. Did I get that right? What? 60 is the new 50 in terms of that. And I think there's something to be said for that. Because why? People today are what? More health conscious. They're living longer. We have the advantage of what? Modern medicine. Yeah, technology has come a long way. We eat better. Do people rest better? They go to the gym. I guess I could throw this out. There's medications available for what? Stress, depression. I mean, just think of it. There was an era where we didn't have any of that. But on the other hand, did our grandparents have less stress? Did they have less stress? Yeah, but there's a discussion here on campus. They had more kids. Did kids behave better back in the day? You know? I mean, back in the day, who got a car when they were 16? Yeah, it was simpler, right? It was simpler when we all had a what? Landline phone. Somehow we lived, we survived, okay? But people are, and then you run into seniors that have a lot of pride. You need to respect that. So here's a term that I always throw out when I have this discussion. And be observant in your departments to see if people do this. And we could talk about this for a long time. And it's this term. Calling your patient honey. All right, where does that, who's that usually directed to? Who does that usually involve? How about an age group? Is it the older? Or you call them honey, tap them a good job today, hon. Okay? It can be. What, Heather? Yeah, that would, yeah, probably. We could, ma'am and sir is fine, yeah. But some people just have this term, hon and honey, in their dialogue, and they really don't know they're doing it. And it could affect a certain population. Another thing you're going to see, you know, I really don't, around seniors, we're talking in the gerontology piece now, you're going to see healthcare professionals raise their voice when they're trying to talk to a senior citizen. If you haven't done it, maybe you've seen it. I don't know if that's necessary or not. I'm sure many times they can hear you, maybe they can't comprehend. Okay? And in your department, on your x-ray table, give them simple commands and let them respond. Move to your left, move to your right, roll up on your left side, roll up towards me. Okay? Give them simple commands. And here's another thing, as long as we're talking about seniors, excuse me. I guess I'm getting a little, you all know who Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is, right? Anybody? Okay, the stages of grieving and dying. Have you heard of that? From Psych 101? I'm going to tell you. Seniors, they know when they're going to die. They have a premonition, and they may say something to you about it. Because I've had a patient say to me, well, I won't be seeing you anymore. What do you think that means? Yeah, they do know this. Just be sensitive to that. Oh, and then there's one last that I want to talk about before we get into the housekeeping piece. It's sinus. It's the, there's a generation that, and you may, I don't know that it's that common in your generation, but maybe in your grandparents' generation, we don't talk about health problems. We don't talk about mental problems. It's kind of this, you know, they're myopic. You think? No, I think Ethan thinks it's a guy thing. No, I think it affects both genders. My mother was a very proud woman, and there is nothing wrong. Okay? You've seen this. Yeah. We don't talk about this. You know, and then as a young person, you start to age a little bit. You have to go to the doctor, and they give you this form to fill out about the history of your family. And guess what? You have no idea if diabetes runs in your family or heart disease or stroke. Why? Because we don't talk about that stuff. Okay? I think over time, that's fading away. I think over time that fades away. Because what am I? What am I? A baby boomer. I don't find that to be that prevalent within the baby boomer generation. You know, it's interesting. When you go in, if you were to go out to McDonald's now or a diner or a bakery, okay, and you walk in, what are you going to see? No, people in diners, sitting in diners, McDonald's, Denny's, places like that. You're going to see groups of retired people, okay, having coffee, maybe having a donut. I call that cronyism, okay? Men and women do it, and what do they talk about? Not quilting or like, they talk about what? Each other and their ailments, don't they? So people today aren't so uptight about health. And you know, they're really not so uptight today either about mental health. Okay? People have no qualms today talk about, oh, I have depression and I take. It seems to be rather open compared to back in, you didn't talk about that stuff. All right, this is where we're going to stop for today. Like I said, this material is part of exam 3 for patient care. Exam 2 on radiation protection, inverse square law, is available. I'd like to have that done by the end of the month. So let's do some housekeeping. We'll talk about that and then we'll take a break before physics. All right, for clinical. I'm still, I had a surprise from Memorial Hospital. They informed me that they couldn't take as many students as we assigned. So I'm in the process of reassigning some students, and I'm going to finish this up today. So some of you I will be reaching out to as far as clinical goes, and I have a plan for everyone. Okay, so, I've called around to other hospitals about taking students. Everybody's packed. Because you need to understand there's other schools in town. And guess what they're doing? They're pounding on the door. Okay? So I've been hard doing that. You don't need to reach out to me. I'll be reaching out to you. And we'll have that. So your first day of clinical, we should be prepared with uniforms, markers, like I said, a classmate will show up with an envelope that has your comp roster, comp forms, and your radiation monitoring badge. Your first day of clinical is Monday at 7:30. Report to the radiology reception area. And I'll tell you who to ask for by hospital. If you're going downtown, you're going to ask for Dina. Dina. Radiology reception, ask for Dina. Yep. Atala. Atallah. Those of you going to Memorial Hospital, you want to ask for Amy. Memorial Hospital. Those of you going to Baptist South, ask for Brittany. Those of you attending clinical at Baptist Beaches, ask for Jamie. And those of you that are reporting to Baptist Nassau, ask for Robin or Jenny. Yes. Now, the first thing that I like to have the students do is get a level of comfort. Ask them, this is where I parked. Is it okay? If it's not, you should move your car, because I don't want you going through the first day of clinical wondering, am I going to get a ticket? Am I going to get towed? All right, so that's something you need to cover on the first day. Remember with clinical, this is how it works. You walk, you crawl, and then you walk, and then you run. Okay, a year from now, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be running. But now you're crawling. You need to learn, like I say, the X-ray procedure is this. The procedure. Taking the X-ray is a little piece. It's the before and after you need to be sensitive to. Any questions on the material? Yes, Baptist Downtown is the big hospital. Any questions on the materials? Everybody should pretty much have what they need. I'm ventured to say that some of you, maybe by the end of the day, will be doing chest images, because you'll see a few and you'll say, between the lab and this, I got this. I think it's been known to happen. Yeah. for some, not all. You know, another thing, you know, we've talked about this, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. We all spent our time doing something called scut work. You know what scut work is? Grunt work. We've all done it. Somebody says, wipe the table down, you wipe the table down. Somebody says, get a sheet or a pillow or a pillowcase, change it, you do it. Because guess what? A year from now, you're going to be saying to some junior student, you need to do that, okay? You kind of move up through the ranks on that. Now, as of today, yes. I mean, the whole key was I got those radiation badges. Yeah, everybody's going. Now, you know, I could get back to my office and get an email, but I know how to get a message out to you guys. Now, one other thing. Some of you have heard this, some of you have not. I don't get to meet students as candidates. You know what I mean by a candidate? That's before you got the letter, you were a candidate. And back in the day, I would talk to more candidates than I do now. And I give what I call my 2-minute lecture. Anybody here ever heard my 2-minute lecture? Okay. Here's the 2-minute lecture, and this is purely about people and the people you're going to meet. Okay? If you've had a job and you've worked in the service industry, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? You're going to run into some people that in life are basically what? They're miserable. All right? And they look at you as a brand new junior student and they say, you know what? She needs to be miserable too. And they just make life hard, harder than it needs to be. That's a small percent. 90% of the people you run into in your departments are going to take you and show you what to do. But there's always that. Okay? You might have seen this in a job you've worked before. Okay? Unfortunately, it's out there. I don't promote it, but it's there. And you know, and as students go through clinical, they come back here to the classroom and they complain about it. And I just sit where I'm sitting now and they complain about it, and it's okay. But then I say to the student, what are you going to be like someday? Oh, I know how I'm going to treat my student. It's not going to be like that, and it never ends. Okay? It just never ends. Pardon me? No, no. You're going to move around. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're going to find people that you really want to work with. Some people are going to be great role models for you. Yeah. It's a matter of figuring out the lay of the land. It's like starting a new job, you know, and what am I talking about? It's interpersonal relationships. Yeah. It's just life. And, you know, those of you that have worked in the service industry as a waiter or waitress or a server, you know what I'm talking about. You've run into that. All right. Any questions from the group here? Or you can email me. I'm working on the memorial piece. No, I don't think they charge you to ride that bus downtown. All righty, let's take a break. We'll come back at about 9:35. All right, so let's begin the second hour here and talk about physics. I did. Yeah. Yeah, give me a little credit, Ethan. Oh, and by the way, class, we've just received word from Ethan's mom that today is his birthday. So feel free to type in happy birthday greetings to Ethan. All right, so there's a few. Birthday greetings are coming in, Ethan, from your classmates. All right, another thing, but before I don't want to forget, not to take things for granted, you will have to report to clinical with a mask. Okay? Just, no, don't worry about that. There was no discussion about the N95 and things like, you'll have to have a mask. All Baptist students have to provide their own eye protection. Memorial has indicated they will provide eye protection for you. Have yours. Yeah. All right, physics, chapter 4. Magnetism. Now, magnetism is not very, well, it's something that you're probably familiar with because we've all done what, when we're sitting around with nothing to do, we do what? If you have it, you do what? You play with magnets, right? You play with magnets. Don't tell me you don't know because, you know, that this is one of my things we all have in our home. We all have a refrigerator, don't we? And what's on the front of the refrigerator? And what's that door for? Is it to keep the cold in or for you to put your magnets on? All right. Yeah. All right. So we all know what magnets are. All right. We played with them at one point or another. So let's define it as the ability of certain metallic ores to attract pieces of iron. So let's look at some classification of magnets. Something called a natural magnet. A natural magnet would be like an ore found in the ground. And when I say ore, I spell it O-R-E. And the material has been magnetized from the Earth's magnetic field. Another classification is the artificial permanent magnet. This is something you've seen before. This is the hard steel shaped as a horseshoe magnet. And it's been artificially magnetized. And this will be a test question. You'll need to know what Nico, Alnico, Nico. What is Nico? Nico is the following. It's an alloy of aluminum, nickel, and cobalt, and that is an artificial permanent magnet. And the nitty gritty for this chapter and pertaining to imaging and the equipment you use is the third classification here called an electromagnet. And that is, we bring in electric current. Down the road, you will see how this is constructed, but we bring in the electric current, and an electromagnet is temporary. So before we go on, I'm going to talk a little bit about electromagnets. Where, and I'll take answers from the group here and from you folks at home in the chat. Where in your personal life have you ever dealt with an electromagnet? Ethan says every day. I'm looking for examples. No. You mean the gear shift? Yeah, I guess when you're, yeah, I'm looking for something maybe a little more fundamental. Where in your personal life have you ever used an electromagnet? You have. No, there's no electricity involved there. But you're thinking, that's good. I mean, that's part of the world of magnets, you know, a compass. Okay, the battery is part of it. All right, I'll give you an example, and I'm sure you've all done this. Do you ever go to visit somebody, or maybe where you live, somebody has to be buzzed in at the door, right? You buzz them in. That's an electromagnet, okay? Well, you know, you're activating or deactivating a circuit to move something so that the door can open. Same thing, you're triggering something to occur. Now, again, I said electricity, so we have to have a power source. How about this one? You all have the little button on your car key, and you do what to the door? You lock and unlock your door. Electromagnet. Pardon me? To start it, you trigger something, okay, and then it's mechanical from there. But to trigger it, so now let's move on to in radiography, already as a student, where have you used electromagnets? Ethan says the detent, and I'll accept that, but even a little simpler. No. That's manual, you know, the collimator light, you move. I'll give you, when you want to do something in that radiography room, you've got to do something, and then you can. What? No. That floating table? That floating tabletop in there, you put your foot on a pedal, and then what happens? You move the table around, right? You're engaging or disengaging something to let that happen. All right, but you got to have what? Electricity, electromagnets. More on this down the road.
So it's all magnetism is going to be
Matt,
either permanent, I mean artificial or temporary.
everything we just talked about is electromagnets. When you have a power source or electricity or a battery, electromagnet.
Okay, power source.
All right, laws of magnetism. Laws of magnetism, I'm looking at those on page 63. There's one there. We've talked about something like this already, and that's repulsion and attraction. When you've played with magnets, sometimes they attract, right? And sometimes when you flip them, they what? They repel, okay? Magnets have something called north and south poles. And you see that on the figure there in 4-4. And what else comes into the laws of magnetism? Something we're familiar with, right? The inverse square law. And you know, when you play with a magnet, and you're playing with the magnet and you feel the, I'm going to pick on this one, the repulsion. You feel that? You feel that? Those are what are referred to as magnetic lines of flux. You can't see them, but you know they're there, aren't they? The magnetic lines of flux. You know, I don't really do inverse square law for this piece. No. What formula?
The magnetic flux.
No. No. That's beyond the scope of what I want to do here. But that was a good question. No. I want everyone to look at figure 4-4. And what statement can you make, figure 4-4, what statement can you make about magnetic lines of flux? I'll give you all a hint. Look at the direction. Is it south to north, Ethan? Everything I'm looking at shows them flowing where? north to south. Does everybody see that? That's what I'm looking for. All right, let's talk about something called the nature of magnetism.
Professor, I'm confused. You seem extremely knowledgeable and confident on this. And it says on page 61, south to north. I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding.
They used to think current would flow that way too, but we're going with north to south.
Does that apply to all three of the laws? Is that it in a nutshell, the flow from north to south?
You're going to see that, yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
so that is
Yeah.
applicable to like all three of those laws, kind of.
Let's talk a little bit of the nature of magnet. The nature of magnetism, if you have a magnet and you break it in half, you have two separate magnets. In other words, one is not magnetized and the other is not. You have two separate magnets if you break a magnet in half. Here's the other one. Now, if a piece of steel is heated or hammered while it lies near a magnet, the steel becomes a magnet. And if an iron bar is stroked repeatedly, iron bar stroked repeatedly with one end of a magnet, the bar will become a magnet.
What was the first one about something breaking in half?
If you break a magnet in half, you have two magnets. In other words, the north doesn't go one way, the south doesn't go another. It's two magnets, yeah. All right, let's look at the picture on page 61 in our book, a little bit more on how this occurs. All right, I want you to look at figure C where things are non-magnetized. Does everybody see that? So let's look at a material that's not magnetized. That's kind of what the electron looks like. No special arrangement. So, you know, in an electron in an orbit, and I think that I have you guys do this yet? Okay, in other words, for one electron spinning this way, there's one spinning the other way. It's hard to do, but envision that. Okay, in a non-mag, what happens up there under B? It's magnetized. What are they all doing? They're all spinning in one direction, aren't they? And when we have them all spinning in what direction, it's a what type of material? Magnetized. Does everybody see how they go from where? North to south.
There's a lot of confused people, and I think I'm one of them.
Can you come like point to this diagram?
Which one?
Where?
So you're saying north to south.
See?
So
I thought you were asking a question from magnet.
okay,
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
I'm just talking about these magnetic lines
What's
of
outside?
flux. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the
Oh,
thing.
those are the lines.
Those are lines of flux.
Okay, these are lines.
You're
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we're trying to clear up some confusion. If you look at page 61, all those dotted lines, those are the magnetic lines of flux. Those are the things I talked about previously that you can feel, That's magnetized material. All the electrons are spinning in one direction, and you can see then it gives up what? Magnetic lines of flux. All right, before we get into magnetic classification of material, I want to give you two terms that you need to be familiar with. And that is magnetic permeability and magnetic retentivity. So let's define these two terms. And this is test material if you may want to star it. Permeability is the ease with which a given material can be magnetized. Permeability, the ease with which a material can be magnetized. Retentivity is the ability of a magnet to maintain its magnetic ability. So get comfortable with the terms high retentivity, low retentivity. High permeability, low permeability. So let's talk about magnetic classification of materials, and we'll get a level of comfort with these classifications, and then we'll talk about some real life scenarios. All right, the first one I want to talk about is, I'm at the bottom of page 64, something called ferromagnetic material. This is material that is strongly attracted by a magnet. Can be permanently magnetized. The second one I want to talk about is paramagnetic material. And I'll use, in the word I have in my notes, it's the material is feebly attracted by a magnet. An example of this material is platinum. The next one in your book is diamagnetic material. This is repelled by a magnet. And the fourth one is the non-magnetic material. This material cannot be magnetized. So in other words, this material, you cannot do anything to it to get the electrons flowing in one spin and creating magnetic lines of flux. Some people refer to this as non-ferrous. So let's talk about this type of material. And what I talk about is the MRI. Let's talk about an MRI. Of course, you know, in an MRI room, there's what? A big magnet. Anybody ever wonder about what kind of magnet's in there? What kind of magnet's in that machine? It's a big electromagnet. Okay, so in other words, what? There's electricity going through that machine. Have you ever heard the pounding? Have you ever been around an MRI? You hear the, well, that's the electromagnetic, things are heating up. That's what's going on. Now, it's always interesting about, with an MRI, you know, you can't go around an MRI with what? You have to stay distant from an MRI with what? Okay, Ethan says ferrous metals. Let's look at some examples. Bobby pins, very good. Piercings. What else? Metal implants, very good, Ashley. Yeah, that. Credit cards. You know, you might feel this. You know, a metal button. Paper clips. I went in one day. I had a paper clip in my pocket. It went flying. Oh yeah, that has to be non-ferrous. The story that people love to tell is that they installed an MRI unit. And guess who's got to come along and check it out? The fire department. They got to see that there's airflow. Well, you've seen those floor fans? Somebody got a little too off it went. Bang, right into the unit. I mean, that could have hit somebody. Yeah, there's always that story. Okay, now, let's stop and think about an MRI. Let's stop and think about an MRI. Going in an MRI room. What if you're a maintenance man and you've got to work on an MRI unit? What kind of material are your tools?
Powered on?
Yeah, let's say it's on. Well, okay. Very good point, Ethan. If you have your tools and it's on, what kind of tools do you need? Non-ferrous tools. These tools have to be made of a material that won't be magnetized, because I'll tell you, when you're in there and the machine is off, the electromagnetic piece is gone, but there's still a magnet in there, isn't there? It's still a magnetic field somewhere in there. So you have to have non-ferrous tools. Same for, think of this. We have one here in the lab. That little stretcher over there, that material has to be what? Non-ferrous, the metal piece, because you're going to wheel it in there. Oh yeah, all the material. I mean, think of this way. If you're on oxygen and you have to have an MRI, you're not going in there with that cylinder. Okay, it's got to be all looked at. It's got to be all looked at. Now, let's talk too about, we'll talk about an MRI room. Let's just talk about the room. Okay, now, if you have an MRI room on a ground floor somewhere, no problem. But if you have an MRI in the hospital up on a few floors, that floor's got to be reinforced for weight. Okay, for one thing. Now,
What do you mean for weight?
oh, those things are heavy.
Oh, just like
Oh,
physical weight.
they're heavy. Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, what
No,
is
no.
this?
Well, yeah, you're talking,
That happens too.
the students are concerned about, okay, what about this magnetic lines of flux, right? We looked at magnetic lines of flux in the beginning of the chapter. They go out. All right, so let's talk about a freestanding MRI center, a building that sits around. Did you ever notice one? Outside the building, they'll have that little fence with the stones, right? Why is that there? Okay, everybody with me? Freestanding MRI center. And right outside the unit, there's that little fence with all the stones that you can't go near. Why? Because those magnetic lines of flux go outside the building. You can't walk by there with a lawnmower. See? All right, now, we can contain those magnetic lines of flux by doing what to the MRI room? Say it. Steel shielding. In other words, the walls have to have steel in them to do what? Contain the magnetic lines of flux. But when you have a freestanding building, what's cheaper? The steel or the little fence with the stones? Okay, now what do you do in a hospital? Guess what the hospital all has? They have the steel in the walls to keep the magnetic field in there. I'm really not sure. Okay, but again, if you're up on a floor, there's more weight, isn't it? All right, now let's talk a little bit more about, so in other words, we have to have steel shielding to keep the magnetic field in the room. Everybody good with that? Let's talk about something else in a magnetic MRI room. Now, there is something that some of us grew up with, and it's called the little transistor radio. You all know what that is? A little transistor radio. It has the little battery, the headphone, right? If I had one here and I turned it on, would it play? It'd play, because there's radio frequencies all around us, right? There's radio frequencies all around. That's how TV works too, when you have TV antennas. Okay, it would work sitting right here. Now, if I took that into an MRI room, just took it in the room, would my, and the unit even doesn't have to be there, would my transistor radio play in an MRI room? Why? No, those radio frequencies would still get in there. They'd still get in. And
The transistor would be affected by the magnetic field making its own electricity.
I took the MRI unit out. I'm just talking about an empty MRI room. An empty MRI room. Would the radio play? I'm telling you it won't. I'm going to tell you why. Okay? So we've got an empty MRI room. We've covered the steel plates for the magnetic lines of flux. Now we're moving in another direction. An MRI room has to have a large copper screen around it. A big antenna around it to absorb the what? Radio frequencies. So in other words, an MRI room has to be pure of no TV signal, no radio signal. So we build a big screen to absorb it all. That's our big antenna. Pardon me? Yeah. All right, so why do we have to go through all of this? Ethan wants to explain.
The MRI produces radio waves, and the computers calculate the deviation of those radio waves from the magnets based on our tissue.
You understand it. I'm going to explain it a different way, but that was very good, Ethan. This is why when you're doing an MRI, now we're going to put the machine back in, and we're going to do an MRI. What we do to your body creates a what? RF signal. Okay? And based upon the composition of the tissue, it gives off a certain signal. Diseased tissue gives off what? A certain type of signal. That signal that your body gives off is processed electronically, and we get an image. It's converted. That's how an MRI works. So you see, we have to have a room free of any radio frequencies because our body is going to give them off. Our body is going to give them off. I'll use this word loosely. That signal is trapped, processed electronically, and we get our image. So you see, the MRI is a big deal. The MRI is a big deal. It's a large expense, but the images, okay, are just beautiful. These MRI units allow us to image soft tissue like we've never had before.
If somebody has, say, metal plates or something and go in the room, do they feel it pulling or something?
Oh, it could, yeah. I mean, I've gone into an MRI room now, holding a key. That was the real thing. Just hold a key, you know. It starts doing this. Yeah.
I feel vibrations in my head and in my feeling.
Do you? You feel sensations? So here's another thing that and we'll talk about this summer. We're talking about patients, and they've discovered this. This summer, you're going to learn how to position for all your skull work, your face work, and all that. People that are scheduled for an MRI will be worked up. In other words, they'll have to give a history of where they've worked. In other words, here's how that kind of goes. Have you ever worked in a factory? Have you ever worked around iron filings and things of that nature? Because people can get iron filing slivers in their eyeball and don't know it. They don't know it. And you walk in an MRI room, what's going to happen? They could move and do what? Well, no, it won't be that bad, but it'll move around. And guess what that could do to your vision? It could destroy some tissue. So people get screened for MRIs this way. You go in and you get some orbit x-rays. It's in your positioning book. If you want to look up orbits, you'll see. And they're looking for what? Little slivers of metal. Okay, and then they can get cleared and they can go for their MRI. But they have discovered that over time. We didn't know that from the beginning.
What do they do if they do have them in their eye?
Yeah. What would that be? CT. They can go to CT.
And they only, so not everybody gets orbit x-rays, only people who've been exposed.
Well, sometimes out of precaution, more than none, get that orbit x-ray to make sure there's no, we don't want any problem. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. So I usually talk about this stuff when we start to talk about what? What are we talking about today? What's this chapter? Magnetism and electromagnetism, okay?
So if they have like rods or nails in like the knee, it won't try to pull out.
All depends what it's made out of, okay? They're making prosthetic devices now that are non-ferrous, yeah. But you got to tell them.
Titanium ferrous?
I think titanium's okay. But you got to, in other words, you go for an MRI, you're going to get the 3rd degree. Yeah. All right, so that'll conclude for today. This is Group A, correct? Group A is here. They're going to be doing some things in the lab. And I'll sit here for a few minutes. And I'm on campus today till about 2 o'clock. I've reviewed for that. Natalia, I would ask you to speak to a classmate. You're welcome, Kieran. No, Natasha, you don't need to come by because a classmate is going to bring it to you.
I think I got chair. The jogger style is just like, I already spent money on that. I'm like, yeah, I got like can we, if we do decide to take the test, we have a little bit of time.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can do lab, stick around, take the test.
Okay, well, how late are you here till?
2.
Oh, okay.
Take test 2 when you come for lab. You can stick around and take it. Sure, go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's the prettiest thing I've seen. When you look at it,
Shannon, we'll talk about that. I've reviewed for chapter 9. Sienna recorded chapter 9. Reach out to her. She'll tell you where it is. I will work on posting that chapter 9 review. All right, so don't anybody leave because I may want you to carry an envelope so you guys can begin your lab.
Has anyone been here for, like, taking extra for, like, the hands and stuff?
Oh,
To see it? Okay, I haven't seen it.
now, can you save this to where it needs to be?
Yeah, yeah. I can like
Thank you.
right here. Right. Yeah, my laptop died, and I was like, oh, I've got other stuff I gotta do anyways. I didn't want to record it, so.
All right.
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Hey, what do I click to upload it or save it and then upload it?
I guess going. Because we haven't covered everything yet, so.
Anybody know?
Oh, man, now you're making me think I should jump on it.
I know, right?
Yeah, for clinical.
It's just busy freaking.
I'll look for chapter 9 when I get to it. So it's probably gonna save it to some file somewhere. Where is it? Where's the standard save spot?
What shots did you have to do?
Does anybody know the standard file place that's gonna save from setting up the Zoom meetings? All right, I'll try to figure it out. Where's the chat? Oh, there we go. No wonder you can't see chats.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's stressful. God, 2 weeks. There's something wrong.
I'm just reading your comments before I close the video and do what y'all are saying.
Because I did the quantum theorem, which is for tuberculosis, you can get blood work too. So I got a bunch of stuff done at one time.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah,
It'll do it automatically? Okay.
2 weeks.
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna turn this off. It'll pop up a save point, whatever was used before. Cool. All right. Alrighty, y'all. Anybody need anything from me before I click
Yeah,
the
they're just not wanting to
stop?
take the time to figure it out.
I'm like, I told him I have a, I
Yeah.
started on Monday, I need to get my stuff done.
Right. You're just waiting for the results?
Peace.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm like, can you just give me the damn shot?